Welcome to Statutes and Stethoscopes, where million-dollar verdicts are won or lost on medical evidence and where the chart never lies. We take you inside the high-stakes world where medicine meets justice. From forensic pathologists who read death like a story, to trial attorneys who turn complex medical records into courtroom victories. These are the voices that matter when everything is on the line. Discover how expert witnesses survive cross-examination, uncover red flags in nursing home records, and learn why the right medical insight can change everything. This is Justice in Action, where every case could be someone's last chance for truth. Here's your host, Tracy Liberatore.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Statutes and Stethoscopes. Today's guest brings a rare blend of courtroom prowess and frontline emergency experience. He's been practicing law for over 22 years at Horrigan, Kluger & Quinn, where he's been a partner since 2008. His primary focus, motor vehicle accidents, especially those involving rideshare services. And today, he's here to discuss both the legal and insurance angle every practitioner should understand. But his legal acumen is only half the story. Born and raised in Pittston, Pennsylvania, he not only served as 3-term city councilman and deputy mayor, he is also a state-certified EMT and active firefighter. His leadership continues as the Director of Department of Public Safety for Pittston and Vice President of the Greater Pittston Regional Ambulance Board of Directors. He brings firsthand insight into the trauma accident victims endure because he's been the one responding to those calls. His legal achievements are equally commendable: Pennsylvania Super Lawyer, National Trial Lawyers Top 40 Under 40, Best Lawyers in America, and a proud member of the $1 Million Advocacy Forum. With that, everybody, meet my guest, Mike Lombardo. Welcome to Statutes and Stethoscopes, Mike.
Thanks, Tracy. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So what made you decide to transition from medicine to law?
I actually started in business. I went to King's College and I started in the business program there. King's is a great business school. But I always had a inkling in the back of my mind to want to get into the law. I was actually born on law day. So my grandfather said I was destined to be a lawyer, but I resisted that. I wasn't a person who I always dreamed of being a lawyer, pictured myself being a lawyer. I have, my uncle was a physician. It's something I thought about doing. But at that time, that was before I got into emergency work, blood and guts were not for me. And I also didn't see myself in the corporate world and the business world either. And life comes at you fast when you're at college. You have to pick a lane.
Absolutely.
And the law was right there in front of me. So it was just like, you feel that pressure when you're in college. You have to do something with your life. And I don't want to say by default, but in a lot of ways it was. I did find myself by default in the legal profession.
Okay. You were the EMT first, right?
Yeah, I had family that was on the job that was involved with the fire service and EMS. And again, as a kid, you like seeing the big red fire truck go by. I was always drawn to that. I grew up in downtown Pittston. When the alarm would go off, I'd run to the window and watch the fire truck go by. But again, not something I pictured myself doing. But I did have family in that field. And as a kid, you look up to people in your family and things that they do interest you. But I was never motivated to actually get involved. Didn't think that I had the ability or the skill to do that. One of my family members was unfortunately killed in the line of duty when he was a fireman in Pittston City, and that kind of was crossroads in my life. You used to say to yourself, yeah, no, it's inspiring to a degree. You don't want the death to be in vain, and kind of inspired me to do public service, just seeing the impact that he had on the community. And you say to yourself, I'd like to do that too. I'd like to get involved. When that happened, I was in my teens and didn't really have a lot of direction, as I said a moment ago, in terms of where I wanted to go. But that was a crossroads in my life. It was inspiring to me. It's a phoenix from the ashes type of thing, a very bad thing, a tragedy for our family, something that still impacts us to this day. But it was inspiring to me and other members of our family who also entered into public service, most notably my cousin Mike, that was his brother who was killed. He entered into politics and ultimately became mayor in Pittston. And I've been helping him and working with him in the community in the city. But getting back to what you originally asked me is how did that translate into emergency work? That's how I got involved. So after he was killed, as soon as I was able, age-wise, to join the fire department, I did. And just as I said, as a kid, I always, every little kid at some point when they're a kid, say, I want to be a fireman when they grow up. That attractiveness was always there. But as soon as I was able, I joined the fire department to start getting all the training. And because I didn't want to just join and just get a t-shirt and have a place to hang out.
Sure.
I wanted to actually do the job and do it well and be respected. That's a discipline, a career, or a field, I should say, where nothing is more important than being respected by your peers and being viewed as someone who can do the job competently and do it. That's something that in any fireman who's worth anything, that's one of the most important things. You want to be respected and you want to be able to be relied on. I made sure that I got all the training that I could so I could be one of those people. Didn't really want to be standing outside the fire. That's to take from the Garth Brooks song. They don't want to be standing outside the fire. You want to be the guy in there helping and being a part of that team. Much to my mother's chagrin, because I joined not long after the March 15th fire, much to my mother's chagrin, I told her, like, I'm just going to be a supportive role on the outside. But I told her that just to ease her mind because she obviously didn't want me to get involved in fire service after what had just happened.
Sure.
But I didn't want to do it halfway. And that's how I ended up getting involved with that. And then it's just a natural progression, at least at the time in Pittston it was, that if you joined the fire service, you eventually would get involved with the ambulance. And as I said a moment ago, blood and guts wasn't my thing up until that point. But the attitude is try it out, see if you like it. And I did. And it ended up, here I am 30 years later, still doing it. You get over your fears. Again, it's the same thing I talked about with the fire service. You want to be respected. You want to be looked at as someone who is very competent at the job, someone who people could look to and when the chips are down and know that they could count on you. So again, you get the training, you try to immerse yourself in the service, get as much experience as you can, because you don't want to be a slug. You don't want to be someone who you can't depend on. Certainly, that's given me a lot of perspective over the years. I've quite literally been on thousands of EMS calls, and obviously it's not the same level as an MD or even an RN, but you do learn a lot about physiology and what makes people tick, both physically and psychologically. So there's a lot of overlap in what we do as lawyers, and I think you could, from your other endeavors, you could tell the same story as I'm telling. You learn a lot about humans when you serve them, when you're in a service profession, and of course the law is a different kind, but it is also a service profession. So EMS has given me a lot of insight and experience, and certainly you can speak the language a little bit better than a layperson in terms of vital signs and what makes, as I said before, what makes the body tick. So when you're looking at a malpractice case or something along those lines, you know how to read a medical chart. Yeah. You know how doctors speak, you know how nurses speak, charting, medical abbreviations, all those little things that do help us in our profession. And I'm sure that's something that you can speak to as well, given your other endeavors.
No, for sure. And I just to hit on a point, I know I have a 3-year-old that every time we go out, we have to drive in the direction of the fire department so that he could drive past and just see the fire truck.
Yeah.
One of his favorite things is to kind of walk down there and visit the firemen, the truck, and they're always so nice to let him sit in the truck and take a picture of stuff. So yeah, totally understand where you're coming from with that.
I have a 3-year-old, and it shouldn't be a surprise to you that she too is obsessed with fire trucks and visiting the fire station. Yeah. I show her pictures she wants to look at pictures and videos of fire trucks, and makes me proud.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Being that you were on this track and you started out with a little bit, say, medical training with the EMT stuff, what really was the pivotal thing for you to not go through medicine and to decide to go through law?
Yeah. Interestingly, my uncle, who was a physician, kind of discouraged medicine at the time. And I think a lot of that was due to insurance uncertainties of reimbursements, things of that nature. Just saw it getting away from what medicine had used to be. And doctors don't have the same freedoms that they may have had in terms of ordering tests and ordering the treatment that they would have. He discouraged me from going in that direction just because of the bureaucracy and he really was prescient, because I think you would agree that the way medicine is practiced today,
Yes.
it's just a lot different
all the
than
time.
it was. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
it just, when someone you respect, and someone who was as experienced as he was, discouraging from going in that particular direction, and your ears perk up, and that kind of pushed me into a different direction. And like I said, in law school, in college, I started off looking at a business track, and I just didn't see that as a fit for me. And as I mentioned to you before, as I'm sure most kids that age, when you're your late teens, your early 20s, you just don't have it figured out. But my thought process was, you couldn't go wrong. You can never go wrong educating yourself. And I thought to myself, even just get the law degree. It's never a waste. It's just a good thing to have under your belt. So I was looking at it as, this might even buy me some time. Just because I'm going to law school, that doesn't mean it's going to be the end of my story necessarily. Because again, being involved with the emergency work, I was heavily involved with the emergency work at that time. I wasn't ruling out a career in law enforcement or something along those lines. And I just thought that I'm not going to go wrong with the legal degree. And some of my good friends were also considering law school, and 3 of us actually went as a group. We actually went to high school, college, and ended up going to law school together. So that certainly helped ease the transition, particularly starting in law school, where for me, it was my first time away from home. And that's always, I don't want to say traumatic, that's too dramatic of a word, but it's just different when you're used to, me at least, I'm used to mom's cooking, I'm used to her doing my laundry and stuff, and then you have to figure that stuff out on your own. So it was a little
rude awakening, maybe, right?
It was, yeah, for a couple of weeks, but you figure it out. But yeah, the transition was eased a little bit because I was there with lifelong friends who were still friends of mine. So that I was just saying in my mind, this isn't just because I'm going to law school now, it's not necessarily the end of my story. So I was putting that out in my mind if I wanted to go down a different career path. But I just thought that having the degree would be helpful, and it was always something that interested me anyway. I figured, let's get going, and then my career path took the path that it did once I got into law school.
Absolutely. I always say, now that I have a law degree, I don't know how I survived life without it. You almost need it for daily things, right?
Yeah. It's a way of thinking that I guess you don't really, I don't say regular people, but it just teaches you to think in a different way. And you're right, that's helpful in any discipline, it's not just a means to an end in and of itself. It's a way of thinking that serves you in any profession, critical thinking.
For sure. And so your practice now, you mostly focus on motor vehicle accidents, right? Is there anything specific that attracted you to this type of a case?
My background, being involved with the fire service and being involved with the ambulance, I've been on hundreds and hundreds of accident calls, and you just get empathy for people when they're placed into that situation. And certainly that was a big part of it. Probably the biggest part of it is the path that my career took. When I was in law school, I clerked at the district attorney's office in Luzerne County. As I said, I was kicking around the law enforcement side of things. But Joe Quinn, whose firm I work with now, Horgan, Kluger and Quinn, I knew him since I was a child. We went to the same parish, the same church, and I knew him, but not exceptionally well, just because people from the neighborhood to say hello, and certainly had a great deal of respect for him. And in our area, he was a trailblazer in terms of the way that he handles these types of cases, the effort that he puts into them, retaining the experts in this all-out approach. There's a lot of people that are doing it now in our area, but back when he started, this was a new frontier in terms of handling cases and approaching personal injury work and medical malpractice work. The way that he does it, it was a new frontier. But I saw that from afar, respected it from afar, and thought that if I was going to come back to NEPA to practice law, which is what I wanted to do, but I'm a homebody, wanted to stay in NEPA, I thought that would be a great place to start, to learn.
Sure.
And I did have the opportunity to get a summer position here while I was in law school, and basically I've never left. I continued to work here when I was in law school, my final year, and they made me a job offer, and 22 years later, 22 years later, I'm still here. It became a situation where it's a big part of the practice here And it was just natural for me to gravitate towards those cases. And when those cases come in, I tend to be the one that picks up the ball and runs with it.
Sure.
Just because as your career evolves, you're layering on that experience year after year, and you just get proficient at it, and you have your way of doing things that seems to work, and you could bring that process to bear, and it just becomes natural. A case comes in here, it's like, all right, you start going through the checklist in your mind. Here's what we have to do. So it's just like any discipline, whether it's the law, medicine, a trade, whatever the case may be. You just seem to gravitate towards something that you're proficient in, and ultimately your client or your customer is the one that benefits from that. That's what you're retaining somebody like me or you for, is you're not just buying the knowledge or retaining the knowledge, you're retaining the experience. Absolutely. And being able to bring that to bear for your clients.
Absolutely. And I think with your background as an EMT and a firefighter, it gives you a unique positioning when you're dealing with these car accident cases. Like you said earlier, you know the medical language, what to look for.
Yeah, and the other thing that you realize is that a lot of times when you're handling these types of cases, there'll be pictures of the car and you'll see, geez, there's nothing wrong with it. Or there's just a bump on the bumper. And that means nothing. That means nothing. I would say it means nothing, but it's not determinative. I've seen accidents, and I'm sure you've seen them in your practice too, where you look at a picture and you say, geez, it looks like there's nothing wrong with the car or minor damage. The car's drivable, but you have a person that still has sustained some type of catastrophic injury. You just get that perspective for what it's like on a scene and what the human body goes through in those circumstances and what it could mean from an injury standpoint. And it's just also helpful just to know the system, the way the system works, and who to call when you need to get a report or when you need a witness state, things of that nature. Just being involved on that side of things has certainly opened doors for me and ultimately benefited my clients from just having that access.
Sure. And that sort of brings up a thought for me too, that I think a lot of maybe our listeners might not understand. A bump on the back of the car could lead to a larger injury.
Yeah.
In my head, I started thinking about, and maybe you could talk a little bit about the Pennsylvania laws around the Eggshell plaintiff, as we learn in law school.
Yeah.
You can find as we find them. How does any of that play into what you do?
It comes up in almost every case. It's very rare to have an injured person or someone's coming to you for representation for a personal injury case. It's very rare to have someone who doesn't have something that they complained of in their past, whether they had a previous car accident or some type of sports injury or whatever the case may be, that their spine is compromised. A lot of people have gone to chiropractors for maintenance, things of that nature. And then inevitably, I'm sure you do the same thing. It's one of the first questions I ask is, tell me a little bit about your medical history. And inevitably, there's going to be something in there that involve the spine or involve the neck or the back or some other injury, fracture, some other orthopedic injury. And inevitably that comes up in our cases when we have a person who's been traumatically injured. The opposing side, the opposing insurance company, one of the first things that they look at is what kind of medical history has this person had? And oftentimes they already have that information at their disposal. The insurance companies have the ability to do a search, and they can see what other claims that a person has made in the past for other car accidents or other injury producing claims. So they at least have an inkling that you've had some type of injury in the past. So that becomes important. It's something that we have to look at because that could have an impact on the injuries and the damages that you're claiming in your case. But as you point out, one of the important things to keep in mind is that the law in Pennsylvania, like in most states, recognizes that some people could be more susceptible to injuries than others, but that doesn't mean the law should treat them any differently. And as you mentioned, that's called the Eggshell plaintiff law. So in other words, if you or I are in a car accident in the same car, and that car is in an accident, you might have the greatest spine in the world, and you walk away from it without any injury whatsoever. Whereas I had a back injury 10 years ago, and because of the compromised state of my spine, I'm more susceptible to injury, and I sustain a more serious injury that lingers and leads me to go on and get injection therapy, physical therapy, possibly surgery. The law recognizes that I shouldn't be treated differently just because I'm more susceptible to injury than you are. And that's called the Eggshell plaintiff law. In other words, just because my spine may be just similar to an eggshell, it's susceptible to cracking, that doesn't mean that I should be any less compensated. So as long as we can prove that accident led to the change in your condition, as long as your physician will stand up and write a report or testify that this accident made your condition worse, as long as you have that documentation, you can build a case from that. The law doesn't prevent you from doing that. So pre-accident history, pre-existing history is not necessarily an impediment to the pursual of a successful claim. And that gets back to what we said before. That's why it's so important to take a look at the accident, take a look at the damage to the vehicle, and even that means looking at the interior of the vehicle. We've had cases where you actually can see damage done to the person's seat was broken. That force is going somewhere. That force in that crash is simple physics, is being transmitted through that vehicle, through that seat, and ultimately into your body. And it's got to be, that energy has to be dispersed somewhere. And unfortunately, sometimes that's in the case of our plaintiffs. And if necessary, we've had cases, depending on what we say the mechanism of injury or how the accident happened, where we've retained biomechanical experts or an expert who could come in and explain to the jury just how that force affects a person. Because there's a school of thought, or I shouldn't say school of thought, there's law out there that says that just looking at a picture of damage to a vehicle isn't enough. A defendant can't just bring in a picture of a car and say, hey, there's only a couple scratches on here. Ergo, this plaintiff shouldn't be as injured as they're claiming. That's really the province of an expert. So to get that kind of opinion or idea into a case, by rights, that should come through what's called a biomechanical expert, someone who is well disciplined in physics and could explain to a jury just how that happens, how that force comes from the other person's car and it goes through your car and ultimately into your body and causes the injury that you're claiming. That's just one example of the multifaceted things that you have to look at when you have a person coming to you for representation. But if you're doing a thorough job and a complete job, those are the types of things you have to do. Those are the stones you have to look under to build a good case. Because the other side's going to come at you. They're going to come at you with this stuff, and you have to be prepared to advocate for your client to combat that.
No, absolutely. And so since you brought up experts, let's just answer that question. Seeing how your case does intersect with medicine and, as you said, other types of experts. And our audience is going to consist of some of these people that are maybe looking to become an expert. What is something that's really important for you when you're looking at somebody that you might hire as an expert? What is it that you look for, or the most important thing to think about when you're looking to hire somebody as an expert?
First and foremost, when we're looking at a car accident claim or a personal injury claim, my first area of inquiry is let's look at the doctor who's treating the patient. That would be my first place that I'd want to look, because I think a jury tends to ascribe more credibility to someone who's actually treating the patient, the patient's doctor. They're the person who knows the plaintiff best. And when we're talking about pre-accident issues like we just talked about a moment ago, they have the baseline. They know what the person was like before, and they could tell you what the person is like after and as a result of the accident. But the reality is many doctors don't want to do that. And I think a lot of the people that come to me, a lot of the plaintiffs that come to you are surprised to learn that their doctor, number one, doesn't want to, and number two, doesn't have to if they don't want to write a report or be cooperative in litigation. I understand that to a degree. Like the litigation process, sometimes it's messy. You know what it's like. Sometimes you deal with lawyers who are not the easiest people to deal with. And, doctors don't want to subject themselves to cross-examination and things of that nature. So there are a lot of doctors, which again, I understand. I don't like it, but I understand it, why they don't want to be involved in the litigation process. So then you find yourself having to go outside the box and try to find a good expert. So you ask, well, what's important when you're beginning to do that inquiry? First and foremost, credentials. That's the first thing. What are the credentials of that expert? Because that's going to be the first thing the other side's going to look at and the first thing they're going to attack. So the better credentialed expert you can get, if you have that person, you can already knock the other side back on their heels a little bit. If you're coming to the table with an expert who has the best credentials or great credentials in a particular discipline, board certification, things of that nature, experience, no different in medicine than it is in the law. You want someone who's experienced. So that would be most importantly. And I think the other thing is consistency. And what I mean by that is you want someone who's going to look at the same injury or the same type of injury in the same way. And what I mean by that is you don't want someone who's just going to give any opinion give the opinion that was paid for in a particular case. You want someone who has that consistency. If a doctor or any expert feels that an issue should be looked at a certain way, I don't want to find out that they gave testimony in a case 5 years ago and the other side's going to be able to pull out a transcript that says that expert gave testimony in this case that contradicts what they're trying to say in my case. That's a killer for a plaintiff's case, that lack of consistency. It undermines your credibility, and it's just a cascading effect. You knock out a brick of the plaintiff's case, the house starts to collapse. So that's something that's important. You want to make sure that the expert that you're retaining is consistent, not just because you're paying him. In this case, I'm not paying you. And that's one of the first conversations that I had with an expert. I'm not paying you to tell me what I want to hear. I want to know what's correct, what's the right answer here, because it's not good for me or for the client if we're going down a path that's not supportable and ultimately is going to be undermined. I want to know the bad news, if there is bad news, right away.
Absolutely.
Because then you can make a decision. Maybe this isn't a case that we should be pursuing. Maybe we thought this case was one thing, but this expert that we're bringing in is telling us not, and here's why. This is more so in the malpractice end of things. And in the car accident world, you pretty much know what you're dealing with, and it's just finding the person who has the appropriate credentials to comment on the particular injury, whether it's an orthopedic doctor, a psychological provider, a neurologist, neurosurgeon. Those are typically the people that in the car accident world, neurology, orthopedics, neuropsychology, a neurosurgeon. Those are the folks that we're most often utilizing. But in medical malpractice, as it could be any part of the human body. So it's any discipline out there you may need to rely on. But again, you want what they believe to be the correct answer. You don't want the answer that you're looking for in order to support a case. Years ago, there was a lot, especially when I was first starting, tort reform was a big thing, and frivolous lawsuits. I always said to myself, who would bring a frivolous lawsuit? What's the point of that? As a lawyer, why would you want to do that and spend all your time and money on a case that's not supportable? The notion is ludicrous. It's ludicrous to think that me or you or any lawyer would want to bring a case that's quote unquote frivolous. I don't want to waste my time on that. You don't want to waste your time on that. And you don't want to lose face with a court or even with defense lawyers. We see the same defense lawyers all the time. I'm sure you do too. And that's great because we develop a rapport and they know that I'm going to be honest with them and I expect them to be honest with me. But the minute that I bring a frivolous case is the minute that I'm going to start to lose credibility. And as I said before, once you lose credibility, all is lost.
No, for sure. And it's one of the biggest teaching points for me when I bring on a new expert as well, because I think they don't quite understand. So I'm glad you talked about that. They think they want to give the client, like the attorney, what they want to hear. I can't help them with the case. I don't know what to tell them. I can't. That's what you need to tell them.
That's what I want.
Exactly what you need to tell them. That's right. They need to know that now. They want it. That's right. And they want to know it up front. They don't want to spend all this time and then get into depositions and fight something out there.
And the good thing is that when you found an expert that's honest, when they tell you that you have a good case, you know that this is a good case because you know that expert is the sort of person who's not going to tell you what you want to hear, but is going to tell you what they believe to be the right answer. And that's what we want as plaintiffs lawyers representing injured people. I just want to be honest with them. I could be honest with my client and be upfront with them and manage their expectations. That's important too. Yes. Keeping your client informed and making sure that they know the good, bad, and the ugly as it relates to their case.
For sure, for sure. So with your medical background, why would you ever need a medical expert?
Remember that the role that I'm filling is just the entry to the medical world. I'm at the lowest level. I'm at the emergency care level. And the credentials that I have are I'm certified as an EMT. And I have to get, just like any other medical provider, I have to get continuing education, which I do. I keep my certification active. Even though I'm not as active as I was in the field in prior years, I still keep the certification active, take continuing education classes, make sure that I'm up to snuff with anything that's new or evolving. But my level of expertise is very rudimentary as compared to a physician or even a nurse. I know I have just enough, as I said before at the outset, just to speak the language and have a bit of an understanding. But when it comes to bringing a case in court, my credentials certainly aren't enough to carry the day and to give the opinions that we need to detail our clients' injuries and damages. We need either a nurse or a physician to do that depending on the nature of the case. So again, that comes down to what we spoke about before, the credentials. Having the right credentials based on what you're trying to prove in the case. You have to see what you're trying to prove and then go out and determine who is the expert that has the appropriate credentials to prove that nugget or that issue in the case that you need expert support on. And I think that sometimes that's something that we have to really explain to our clients because they're going to rightfully question you, like, you're hiring this expert and you're spending X amount of dollars on that.
Right.
Well, why are you doing that? The law requires us to do that. We have the burden of proof as plaintiffs, and Lay people can't come in and talk about medical diagnoses. Lay people can't come in and talk about prognosis or what condition is this plaintiff going to be in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. A lay person can't bring out their crystal ball and tell a jury what they think is going to happen to this particular plaintiff by way of prognosis. You need a medical professional to do that. The law requires us to do that. So we have to go out and find the appropriately credentialed expert who can come in and give that opinion and carry the day for us. As I said, we have the burden of proof. So we have to spend the money to build the case. It's just the reality of our system.
Then the law requires you to find somebody within a similar practice as the person that was involved, so to speak.
Yeah, particularly in MCare. We talked a moment ago about frivolous lawsuits, and we all know MCare came out in the wake of that was the state's answer to the supposed insurance crisis where doctors couldn't get insurance. So the scheme that was the statutory scheme that came out of that was MCare, which kind of is the Bible in Pennsylvania for the pursuit of a medical malpractice action, civil action. And yes, it requires you to get, if you're being critical of a physician, it requires you to have an expert with the same credentials, which seems commonsensical, but the statute requires it.
Sure. All right. So switching gears slightly here, anything specifically when you're dealing with these car accident cases that comes up during these cases that's a struggle for you to deal with?
One of the things that, and you mentioned it a bit ago, is we're in this rideshare world now. And a lot of times you don't even realize that you have a rideshare case. If someone is delivering for DoorDash or something, for example, it's not like they have a big logo on the side of their vehicle, or in most cases don't have any kind of like a flashing light or something like that. They don't have a uniform. So you can be struck by someone who is operating under the auspices of one of those platforms and not even know it. And that's a new and emerging issue. And you ask yourself, a layperson would ask, why is that important? Because it dramatically changes potentially the amount of insurance coverage that could be available. So if you have a plaintiff who's catastrophically damaged, there's a big difference if it's just a regular citizen with a regular insurance policy versus can you bring in one of these rideshare companies? And then when you do that, when you've identified, first and foremost is identifying it, determining whether they're even involved. And that becomes challenging. But if you have identified them, it opens up a whole host of possibilities in terms of your ability to recover. These rideshare companies are trying to create this environment where the drivers of the vehicle, the people that are operating at their behest, are independent contractors. And why do they do that? They want to limit their liability. So essentially, they're operating as these nationwide transportation companies, nationwide taxi cab companies, but they want none of the responsibility. They're trying to reap the rewards in terms of the fares or in terms of the delivery fees, but with none of the consequences. It's typically, if you have a taxi cab company or delivery company, you have to provide insurance, liability insurance, workers' compensation insurance. You have to have certain safeguards in place. You have to vet your drivers, vet the people who are working for you, making sure they're competent. You have to monitor them once you hire them to make sure that they are doing everything that they're supposed to do. These rideshare companies basically say, hey, we're just a technology company. We don't have anything to do with that. You're on your own. And that's something that we've been on the forefront of fighting, of breaking down that imaginary wall and showing to the court that they can say whatever they want, but reality tells us otherwise. Reality tells us that they are trying to exercise control over these drivers. They're certainly being well compensated. And that relationship is not one, despite what they want to call it, it is not one of independent contractor and principal. It's one of master and servant. In other words, they are working at the behest of these rideshare companies, earning tremendous profits for these rideshare companies and paying the drivers a relative pittance in compared to what they're requiring to do. But then when push comes to shove and there's an accident, they don't want to be responsible for the conduct of their drivers. So they want the rewards, but they want none of the risk. They want none of the responsibility. So in terms of what we're seeing in the car accident world, that's first and foremost, that's something that's really at the front lines of what we're dealing with. And as a practitioner, it's something that you have to do your best to investigate that when the case comes in, to try to figure that out. It won't necessarily show up in the police report. Police officers aren't in the habit of asking someone when they're in an accident, hey, Are you working for Uber? Unless it's obvious. For example, if they're in the middle of a trip and there's unrelated people in the back seat and someone's driving, something like that where it's a little bit obvious, it may be hard to determine whether that is in fact a rideshare vehicle. And the drivers themselves are reluctant to give that information up. It's not like they're coming in, hey, I'm an Uber driver. They're reluctant to hear that in some cases because they don't want to get gigged. They don't want to get gigged for having been in an accident and lose their access or things of that nature. So there may be reasons. They may not be using their app. That's something else that we're seeing, that some of these drivers are signed in under somebody else's account for a whole variety of reasons. So there's just so much stuff that you have to be cognizant of when someone's in an accident. It's not like the old days where you can just take everything at face value. You really have to peel back the layers of the onion, and you have to do it fast because evidence could be lost. Cameras are overwritten. You want to get access to that data. In this day and age, there's so many surveillance cameras, ring cameras, and in the case of the police, they almost, at most things, it's a little bit slow coming to our area, but a lot of the police departments now have body cameras, and that type of evidence has been invaluable for us in many cases because it puts you at the accident scene. We talked about before that one of the advantages that I've had is being at accident scenes and being really cognizant of what goes on in accident scenes. With body cameras now, anybody could basically put yourself at the scene. Sure. You know, that police officer has that camera on. They're there at the scene and they're walking around, so you can see vehicles at final rest. You can see damage on vehicles that if no one takes pictures, you have that evidence now, so you can see the vehicle damage. You might get information on witnesses, and you hear what witnesses say firsthand. You don't just get a police report and get the officer's interpretation. You hear right from the horse's mouth, you know, what a witness is saying. So it's just, there's just so much stuff that when I first started that you just had no access to, that now you do. And there's so many different considerations, as for example, rideshare, that you just it didn't exist. 20 years ago, it didn't exist.
Yeah, it didn't.
We didn't have smartphones that were just starting to come on the scene 20 years ago or so. But I remember one of the first oral arguments I went to, probably back in 2003 or 2004, one of the defense lawyers on the other side had a BlackBerry. And he was showing everybody, here's my calendars on here. I can get my email. I remember thinking, oh, God, I can't get my mind around that. I can't believe that.
I know. It's amazing.
Yeah.
How technology, how fast, too.
Yeah.
Our kids can't wrap their mind around that we didn't have cell phones at all. We literally had used this phone that was attached to the wall on a cord.
Yes. And he made it out. We don't even have them. Now most people don't have a regular phone in their house.
Yeah. I think my parents are the last. There's a few that still have the house phone.
Yeah.
And even those are now cordless. There's no cords.
Yeah.
So I was just curious if you could talk a little bit more about some of this, maybe some of your trips or tips around people that are maybe trying to do some of this stuff. What have you found that works for trying to get them in as an employee versus an independent contractor? Is there anything specifically that you found that helps? Or I know you said it's a nuanced area, if you will. Just curious if there's anything in there that
I think that we alluded to a lot of the things earlier, that it's just paying attention and trying to get as much data as you can, not waiting to do that because data is lost. But there's just so much of an opportunity for data and information that just didn't exist before, that you really have to take advantage of it and really have to put that hard work in. A lot of the work that I've found in these car accident cases is in the early stages. That's when there's the ability to make or break a case with the information that you're able to discover, going out to the scene if need be, getting a sense for the lay of the land, and allowing yourself to see, are there surveillance cameras around? Are there ring cameras around? Anything that may not be apparent, it just can't be like you get the police report and put the insurance company on notice and then see what happens with your client's treatment, check in with them in 6 months and get the records and then send out a letter to the insurance company. That's just not enough. You're not shouldering your burden as a practitioner and doing right by your client by doing that. You really have to be proactive from the get-go and collecting all that data, doing a thorough investigation. And if you can't do that or don't feel like you have the time or the ability to do that, there's private investigators. There's one that we use all the time that I swear by. That's usually my first call. I think that's invaluable to have someone like that who I don't have to give him marching orders. He knows what to do. I tell him, car accident, here's the location, here's the time. He's off to the races. He knows what to do. And then it makes me sleep easier at night, that I'm dotting my I's and crossing my T's. Another piece of advice, which seems elementary, sometimes it isn't followed. I think that you have to, especially in this day and age, when it comes to ride shares or when it comes to trucking companies that operate under one name but do business in another and are controlled by a third, and
Right.
all these sort of unusual relationships, you're really putting yourself behind the 8 ball if you wait to file suit. If you wait to the last minute to file suit, it's a recipe for disaster. I don't do it. If I can't have a case, my general rule of thumb is if I don't have a case resolved with the insurance carrier within 1 year, I'm filing suit. And in a lot of cases, you just can tell that it's just not going to work out with the insurance company. You get an adjuster who just is jaded or just doesn't like your client or whatever reason. You can just get that sense. It's just like a sixth sense that comes from practicing. This case isn't going to work out. Put the case in suit, start the discovery process, make sure that you've sued the right defendant, the right name, the right corporate entities, make sure that the right people are in the case, because you can get yourself in a lot of trouble if you wait to the last minute. You open up all sorts of issues that if you name the wrong defendant, if you don't get service in time, you can just really shoot yourself in the foot and do a real disservice to your client. That's something, as a rule of thumb, in an auto accident case, if you're not have it resolved within a year, it's not getting resolved, in my opinion. So get it into suit and get the process started.
Okay. And
now, in a lot of cases, I would say that for investigative reasons, I'd file suit right away, not wait at all, not even attempt to resolve the case with the insurance carrier. That's because you want that subpoena power, because, as I mentioned before, there's so many different things that you have to investigate these days in terms of surveillance footage and things of that nature. Well, a lot of places aren't just going to hand that over to you. For example, the 911 center is not going to hand that stuff over to you. If you want 911 records or the audio, things of that nature, they're not just going to hand that over to you without a subpoena. So when you get the subpoena power, it opens up doors. You're able to get reports that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get access to. So that's a timely filing of suit, getting that subpoena power, making sure that you have the right people in the case, name the right defendant, you get service completed, you'll sleep better at night. Those are the sorts of things that get lawyers in trouble. Those are the sorts of things that give lawyers sleepless nights, gives them agita, as we say. So you just don't want to find yourself in that position.
So what would be a key thing that you would look for in this type of a case then that would either make you wait a year or file suit immediately? What would be a tipping point, would you say?
Certainly, if you have a client that's catastrophically injured, I think that's a case that you really want to get in suit right away. You want, what did we talk about before with Rideshare? I'd want to get a defendant under oath answering the question in deposition. If I don't know, or if I'm uncertain, if someone was operating as a rideshare, and I've just had this issue develop in a case. We had an individual who we had no idea he was operating for, it was one of them, I think it was Uber Eats, but we had no idea. There was no evidence of it at the crash scene. There was certainly no indication in the police report. No way that we would have known that until we filed suit and deposed him, and he has to give answers under oath. It's a powerful thing. It's a powerful thing to have to get someone to answer questions under oath. So in this day and age, when you have uncertainty in terms of who was the person operating on behalf of some other entity that's potentially responsible, again, saving yourself that agita, saving yourself that worry that you sue the right people or are the right people in the case. You file suit early, you take their deposition, you get them under oath, and that takes away that issue. That takes away that worry.
Takes away the mystery.
Yeah.
Yeah. Question, sure. I know we've talked a lot about different things that you deal with insurances and stuff. Do you have any tips for people when buying insurance or thinking about insurance? Yeah. Is there anything from an attorney's perspective that you want to share?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the first thing right off the bat that I tell, because I get asked this question all the time. It's people don't understand the difference between full and limited tort. What I've seen with folks with insurance is that, unlike a lot of other things, people just don't want to pay for insurance. They just view it as a nuisance, and they want to try to drive the best bargain. But the best bargain isn't necessarily what makes the most sense for you and your family. You need to make sure that you have the right coverage. Once you figure out what coverage is right for you and what you can afford, then you can shop around from different carriers. There might be a little bit of a difference. One carrier might be a little bit cheaper than the rest, but it's not something to cheap out on. Because one of the first discussions, first things I say when I meet with people is that there's one thing I can't change in this process, one thing and one thing only, and that's the insurance coverage that's available. That's dictated that the moment the accident happens, it's a snapshot in time. Whatever your coverage is at that point, that's what we have to deal with. And everything with these cases is driven by insurance. We can talk about going after people's assets and things of that nature, but the reality is I can only guarantee I can recover for you what they have in insurance and also what you have in insurance on your policy, which kind of segues into when you're shopping for insurance, what's important. First and foremost, full tort. If you have limited tort, you get cheaper insurance, but the trade-off is you can't recover for certain items of damage. The item of damage you can't recover for is your non-economic loss, or it's a fancy way of saying your pain and suffering, which in these cases is typically the biggest piece of the damage pie. So you're really shooting yourself on the foot right at the outset if you're not able to recover for pain and suffering. There's exceptions to that, but you don't want to find yourself in a position where you're searching for exceptions. You'd rather just not have to worry about that and get full tort. But the second thing, as I said a moment ago, the coverage that the defendant has is important, but equally as important, what insurance coverage do you have on your policy? In other words, do you have what's called uninsurance coverage or underinsurance coverage? Uninsurance coverage is coverage to protect you if the defendant doesn't have insurance at all, which happens. And I'm seeing it happen more frequent in our area.
Yeah.
Underinsurance is to cover you if the other person doesn't have enough insurance. So if you have a catastrophic injury, very seriously injured, potentially high value case, if the other person doesn't have enough insurance to properly compensate you, you can look to your own policy. So the short answer is, Tracy, you should have as much uninsurance and underinsurance coverage as you possibly can afford. How much is enough? If you have a death or a catastrophic injury, there's no amount that's enough. So you should have as much as you can possibly afford. Make sure that you have full tort. There's other optional coverages that you can look at. There's coverage that you can have for wage loss. So if you're unable to work as a result of a car accident, that could be important for you, particularly if you're the breadwinner for your house. That's something that you'd want. You can also get things like funeral benefits. And of course, the law requires you to get medical coverage. The first place that you look for coverage if you're injured in an accident is your own policy. Doesn't matter if the other side was at fault. You look to your own policy for medical coverage. So depending on what health insurance you have, you may want to ensure that you have sufficient medical coverage on your auto policy to compensate you for your accident-related injuries when you go to treat. So you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about co-pays and things of that nature. You turn it all over to your car insurance and they pay the bills. They typically are pretty good about paying for the most part. Most of the insurance carriers are pretty good and responsive in paying for that coverage.
All right, great. I think that's great information. So now I want to kind of shift gears again and talk a little bit more about you. We've talked all this technical stuff with the law and the medicine. So we talk a little bit more about Mike,
Sure.
the human.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about growing up. You grew up in the Princeton area too, I think you said, right? And
I grew up in Pittston,
brothers,
went to
sisters,
Catholic school. Yeah, I went to Catholic school the whole way through. I walked to school. I lived right by the schools that I went. They're closed now, as most Catholic schools are in our area. Only child, but I had a lot of cousins, so I never really grew up with the only child experience. I have a lot of cousins who I considered siblings. I never knew anything else. I never lived an only child type of existence. I never felt what that was like. Great network of friends. We share a lot of common interests. Try to value that and get together with them as much as I can. I'm married. I still live in the Pittston area with my wife, and we have a young daughter, Carmela. She's 2.5. I'm still active in Pittston City in the emergency services with the fire department and the ambulance. I was in politics I guess I still am. I guess you never really get out of it. But more advisory and supportive role than actually being a candidate myself. But I did serve three consecutive terms on Pittston City Council. Served with my cousin Mike, who was the mayor, so that was a great experience. So I still stay involved, act as a de facto advisor to him, just because of my background and my knowledge and being involved with the city government. And he's appointed me as the director of public safety, which kind of oversees the fire department and just an advisor to the mayor on those type of matters. Make sure that we're doing everything that we can to have the best fire department that we can have, the best EMS system that we can. So that's a passion and a labor of love, something that I enjoy doing. I don't view it as work. It's not something I have to do. It's something that I enjoy doing. I enjoy bringing my expertise, my experience, 30 years in emergency service. I enjoy bringing that to bear to improving our system constantly. Great group of guys we have at both the fire department and the ambulance who are constantly trying to improve both agencies. It's just a labor of love. It's something that I enjoy doing. I still remain active in the field to the extent that I can. Obviously, with the family, a child, a busy practice. It's not like it was when I was in my 20s, but I still you find time to do the things that you enjoy. That's just the reality. Whatever it is that make you tick, you find time to do it, and I do find time to do it. And Not as much as I would like, but still to the point where it's still something meaningful in my life. I serve on the board of EMS of Northeastern Pennsylvania. That's a nonprofit board that governs, essentially administers the EMS Act on behalf of the Department of Health. Basically does the licensure of the ambulance services, make sure everybody's certifications are up to snuff. So I serve on that board. So again, it's just another outlet for me to bring my experience to bear and to just raise the community up and make sure that we have good emergency services in our area. It's just something that I enjoy to do. So that's a central portion of my life. I suspect it always will be. And again, it's given me not only it's rewarding work doing that, but beyond that, the people that you meet, my colleagues in the emergency work, they become some of my lifelong friends. They're my closest friends. They're my emergency contacts. If I'm out of town, I tell my wife, call one of them. If something happens, that's who you call. There's a lot of rewards to that, to being involved in that beyond just doing the work itself. It's just a rewarding. It's been a central part of my life. And as I said, when my cousin was killed, it was a crossroads, and I really can't picture my life if I didn't do that. I don't know what way it would have gone. It's just added a very fulfilling dimension to my life that I don't think would have been there. The word I used before was the phoenix rising out of the ashes, and it's true. It really was. And I'm not the only one that could tell this tale. There are other people whose lives have been impacted positively by that tragedy. So it's a great thing, and it's a positive spin on something that negatively affected our family for a long time. But
yeah,
here I am.
I think that's so important to be able to reframe such a tragedy and turn it into something that's a benefit. I think that's just one of the greater things as humans, I think, that we can try and do. It doesn't happen for everybody all the time, but when you can do that, for sure. So how about growing up now? I know you said somebody in the family was a doctor. How about your parents? Are you first line lawyer, first line educated, or?
Yeah, my parents were college educated. My mom worked in the Pittston Area School District. My dad worked for the state, for the Department of Human Services. He worked at the Whitehaven Center. He was a unit manager at the Whitehaven Center. But education was something that they stressed. They were first line educated, first to go to college, and emphasized that. Didn't really force me or push me into a particular profession, just taught me the value of education. And that's something that I'm going to pass on to my daughter. I would never tie any strings to her in terms of anything that she would want to do, but I would emphasize the value of an education and how that could impact your life and how valuable that is. And it's beyond just the getting a degree on the wall. It's beyond that. It's the other things. It's the relationships that develop, the connections that you develop, and just smooth out the rough edges in your personality, I think it's just a necessary thing.
Absolutely. I would agree with that 100%. So how about tell us one thing about you that people might not know?
I think I disclosed it all, didn't I? I don't think
I don't know. You might have some secrets left.
Not really secret, but enormous baseball fan, and the Yankees in particular, like to the point of obsession. We can do an hour podcast on that, whether it's statistics, trivia, anything along those lines. So if you're in my orbit, that how important the Yankees are to me, and we go to my wife and my daughter. We've already gone to a couple games this year. It's something that we enjoy to do. So I've indoctrinated her on the fire service. I'm also indoctrinating her on the Yankees. So it's not really a secret thing. I really don't have any secret. I think I'm a pretty ordinary guy. I always say this: the more and more I read stuff in the newspaper, see stuff on TV or on social media, the more normal I realize that.
So the more normal, the there you feel, right?
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. This was really great.
Yeah, had a great time.
Tell us how people could reach you, share us your contact information. I'm sure that with this video, there'll be linked somewhere, but if you want to just share it real quick.
You can reach me through my firm, Horgan, Kluger and Quinn, hkqlaw.com. You search my name on Facebook. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. So you can get me on any of that social media, but you can reach me at the office. Go to our website. Our phone numbers are all on there.
Great. Thank you again, Mike. I'm sure our listeners are going to love this conversation.
Yeah, enjoy it.
Show.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great. So let's bring this to the end of another episode, and I will see you all on the next.
Statutes and Stethoscopes podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode.